Hi, and welcome to the Prado Museum in Madrid, Spain. And we're here again with our weekly Wednesday sessions in English, a project that's supported and made possible by American Friends of the Prado Museum, and the great invitation to be guests on the social media programming of the Prado that we're here live. We are a U.S. nonprofit, and we encourage everyone to find out about American Friends of the Prado to help us with our projects to help this great museum. Today we have the privilege of being here a few moments before the museum opens in a room dedicated to the beginning of really the Baroque in Madrid, and a painting that was a major game changer at the time. We are talking about the triumph of Saint Hermenegild, which was painted by Fransisco Herrera the Younger in the year 1654. So Fransisco Herrera the Younger is a painter whose father, Fransisco Herrera, was also a painter. They were from Seville, and his father was possibly the first teacher of Velázquez, but he had a very bad temper, and Velázquez did not stay in his workshop, and his son stayed a little bit longer, but didn't stay either, from what we understand. And he seemed to, after having initial training, kind of escape in a way to Rome, where he studied and saw everything that was happening in painting in Rome at the time, with the Carraccis, the Bolognese school, the fresco paintings of the Barberini palace, and he brings all this back. This is his trip back after Rome, and he stops in Madrid, and he has this commission. And this commission this work is the central panel, we believe, of a larger altarpiece, which would have had images of other saints, and altarpiece for the convent of Saint Hermenegild, which is a convent, the first convent in Madrid for the barefoot Carmelites, which is a religious order that was founded by Saint Teresa of Jesus and Saint John of the Cross, two Spanish mystics, very influential religious leaders and later saints. And Saint Hermenegild was promoted as a saint by the king at the time of the making of the convent, Philip II. Now here I'm just talking about the saint, not the painting. The saint Hermenegild was promoted because he was a link of a royal family member also becoming a saint. And he's going back quite remote in time. Saint Hermenegild is from the 6th century. He's a Visigothic prince. Now, the Visigoths are here in Spain after the fall of the Roman Empire and before the rest of modern history that comes afterwards. But in the 600s, Hermenegild, becomes a saint because he embraces the Orthodox Catholic faith, which believes in the Trinity, what is declared in the Nicene Creed, and this versus the Arianism which the Visigoths king had embraced, which is a little bit of a theological dispute at the time. But so he embraces and rejects to follow the Arianism rites, and he is put into prison by his father and eventually killed for this. And here in the foreground, we're seeing his father is King Leovigildo, the Visigothic king, and he is dressed as a military leader here with his coat of armor and a kind of an out-of-fashion dress at the time to make us go back to what would a Visigothic person dress like in the 6th century, which we don't have any documentation, but the artist is creating this for the viewer, and he is kind of realizing with this gesture of, oh my goodness, my son was right and I was wrong. No, so these two large figures are the king and the bishop of the Arianism, and they are in shadow, and Herrera is showing us that they are the people who were mistaken. Whereas versus the absolute triumph, well, here, this beautiful beard and these, look at this technique of painting. You know, they're much darker, but at the same time use much more paint to make them very earthly. You know, they're grounded on the earth with these wonderful curls. Look at this curl against the cloud background. You know, the hair, it's just beautiful technique. And Herrera is really painting very virtuosity, with lots of virtuosity. There's no underdrawing. He has learned kind of a fresco technique, even though this is oil, and he's being very fast and energetic. This also goes well with his character, that he was supposed to be a person with a very strong temperament, and so his painting kind of goes along with that personal temperament. And these two figures are versus the absolute triumph into heaven, the prize of going to heaven of Saint Hermenegild, because he chose the right option of the religion. And he's with his symbols, he's dressed as a Roman prince, kind of in a very theatrical way. That would have been common to Baroque theater in Spain at the time. But he's dressed in these clothes that remind of a Roman prince, but at the same time very loosely interpretation. And he has the symbols within this explosion of he's raising into heaven. He's holding the cross. It's beautifully painted in shadow against the light background that's coming out of the painting. And there's the only straight lines we see in the whole painting are those rays of light coming out of heaven. And to the left, he has the crown and the scepter, which show that he is a member of the royal family. He was the prince. Above and all of these angels, musical angels that are part of the clouds that are taking him and accompanying him into heaven, and accompanying the figure that is in a great movement, circular movement, very sinewy, very expressive, very Baroque, filled with movement, and with a strong, powerful figure that is lit from the background. The other symbols that we see are of his prize, of the wreath of the feather, wreath of flowers, and the palm of his martyrdom at the top, that he deserves for his martyrdom, because he was sent to prison by his father for not following the Arianist religious rites, and he was eventually beheaded. And we see that also in the lower angel that are holding his chains here, his chains for imprisonment, and the axe that beheaded him. So he is promoted to the viewer, the faithful, of the triumph of his faith, but the triumph of Catholicism. It's the triumph of the prize of heaven for selecting the correct religious doctrine. And so this is a saint that was kind of promoted by Philip II 2 generations earlier for the barefoot Carmelites, which curiously embrace, curiously as in a juxtaposition, embrace vows of poverty, but a few years later they are dependent upon patrons, and patrons in their founding convents want to have their personal chapels that show their wealth and also their devotion. So there's a little bit of juxtaposition between amazing altarpieces, which was funded by a patron who had been buried in the main chapel of this convent, versus the votes of poverty. And so this painting, Fransisco Herrera painted, and he created a new style that's happening with a religious change, a very strong religious change of impressing the faithful. And in the same room, just before we end, there is a painting 10 years later that very much follows his style of a saint, in this case Saint Augustine, also triumphant and raising into heaven. So he created a new idea, brought it to Madrid, and had followers and people, other painters who would imitate him. Now, he was later on very successful, became painter to the king, became main architect for the king. He was a very well-rounded artist and carried out many, many functions. And this painting was bought on purpose just for the Prado Museum in the 1830s by the king that opened the Prado, Ferdinand VII, because it was recognized as important in the progression of Spanish painting. And so it was up for sale, and the king purchased it specifically to bring it here for the Prado Museum. So we thank you very much. We hope you will visit the Prado, since it seems traveling is becoming more easy, and we would love for you to enjoy all of this in person. But until then, there's much information on the museum's website, and you can also find out more about us and our support for this museum of American Friends, and also at the foundation in Spain, the Fundación Amigos del Museo del Prado. So thank you very much.